Hey, 3rd and 4th grade, we are back with Chapter 18 of The Phantom Tollbooth. Here we go. This is called Castle in the Air. Higher and higher they climbed in search of the castle and the two banished princesses. From one crest to the next, from jagged rock to jagged rock, up frightful crumbling cliffs, and along desperately narrow ledges where a single misstep meant only goodbye. An ominous silence dropped like a curtain around them, and except for the scuffling of their frantic footsteps, there wasn't a sound. The world that Milo knew was a million thoughts away, and the demons were there in the distance. "They're gaining!" shouted the humbug, wishing he'd never looked back. "But there it is!" cried Milo at the same instant, for straight ahead, climbing up from atop the highest peak, was a spidery spiral stair, and at the other end stood the castle in the air. I see it, said the happy bug as they struggled up the twisting mountain trail. But what he didn't see was that curled up right in front of the first step was a little round man in a frock coat, sleeping peacefully on a very large and worn-out ledger. A long quill pen sat precariously behind his ear. There were ink stains all over his hands and face as well as his clothing, and he wore a pair of the thickest eyeglasses Milo had ever seen. "Be careful," whispered Tock, when they'd finally reached the top, and the humbug stepped gently around and up the stairs. "Names?" the little man called out briskly, just as the startled bug reached the first step. He sat up quickly, pulled the book out from under him, and put on a green eye shade, and waited with his pen poised in the air. "Well, stammered the bug. "Names!" he cried again. And as he did, he opened the book to page 512 and began to write furiously. The quill made horrible scratching noises, and the point, which was continually catching in the paper, flicked tiny ink blots all over him. As they called out their names, he noted them carefully in alphabetical order. "Splendid, splendid, splendid," he muttered to himself. "I haven't had an M in ages." "What do you want our names for?" asked Milo, looking anxiously over his shoulder. "We're in a bit of a hurry." "Oh, this won't take a minute," the man assured him. "I'm the official census taker, and I must have some information before I can take your census. Now, if you'll just tell me when you were born, where you were born, why you were born, how old you are now, how old you were then, your father's name, your aunt's name, your mother's name, your uncle's name, your cousin's name, where you live, how long you've lived there, the schools you've attended, the schools you haven't attended, your hobbies, your telephone number, your shoe size, shirt size, collar size, hat size, and the names and addresses of 6 people who can all verify this information, we'll get started. One at a time, please, standing in line, and no pushing, no talking, no peeking." The humbug, who had difficulty remembering anything, went first. The little man leisurely recorded each answer in 5 different places, pausing often to polish his glasses, clear his throat, straighten his tie, and blow his nose. He managed also to cover the distressed bug from head to foot in ink. "Next," he announced very officially. "I do wish he'd hurry," said Milo, stepping forward, for in the distance he could see the first of the demons already beginning to scale the mountain toward them, no more than a few minutes away. The little man wrote with painful deliberation, finally finished with Milo and Tock, and looked up happily. "May we go?" asked the dog, whose sensitive nose had picked up a loathsome, evil smell that grew stronger every second. "By all means," said the man agreeably, "just as soon as you've finished telling me your height, your weight, the number of books you read each year, the number of books you don't read each year, the amount of time you spend eating, playing, working, and sleeping every day, where you go on vacations, how many ice cream cones you eat in a week, how far it is from your house to the barbershop, and which is your favorite color. Then, after all that, please fill out these forms and applications, 3 copies of each, and be careful, for if you make one mistake, you'll have to do them all over again." "Oh dear," said Milo, looking at the pile of papers. "We'll never finish these." And even as he spoke, the demons swarmed stealthily up the mountain. Come, said the census taker, chuckling to himself. "Don't take all day. I'm expecting several more visitors any minute now." They set to work feverishly on the difficult forms, and when he'd finished, Milo placed them all in the little man's lap. He thanked them politely, took off his eye shade, put the pen behind his ear, closed the book, and went back to sleep. The humbug took one horrified look over his shoulder and quickly started up the stairs. "Destination!" shouted the census taker, sitting up again, putting on his eye shade, and taking the pen from behind his ear and opening his book. "But I thought," protested the astonished bug. "Destination!" he repeated, making several notations in the ledger. "The castle in the air," said Milo impatiently. "Why bother?" said the census taker, pointing into the distance. "I'm sure you'd rather see what I have to show you." As he spoke, they all looked up, but only Milo could see the excited circus there on the horizon. There were tents and sideshows and rides and even wild animals, everything a little boy could spend hours watching. "And wouldn't you enjoy a more pleasant aroma?" he said, turning to Tok. Almost immediately, the dog smelled a wonderful smell that no one but he could smell. It was made up of all those marvelous things that had ever delighted his curious nose. "And here's something I know you'll enjoy hearing," he assured the humbug. The bug listened with rapt attention to something he alone could hear, the shouts and applause of an enormous crowd, all cheering for him. They each stood as if in a trance, looking, smelling, and listening to those very special things that the census taker had provided for them, forgetting completely about where they were going and who, with evil intent, was coming up behind them. The census taker had sat back with a satisfied smile on his puffy little face as the demons came closer and closer, until less than a minute separated them from their helpless victims. But Milo was too engrossed in the circus to notice, and Tok had closed his eyes the better to smell, and the bug, bowing and waving, stood with a look of sheer bliss on his face, interested only in a wild ovation. The little man had done his work well, and except for some ominous crawling noises just below the crest of the mountain, everything was silent again. Milo, who stood staring blankly into the distance, let his bag of gifts slip from his shoulder to the ground. And as he did, the package of sounds broke open, filling the air with peals of happy laughter, which seemed so gay that first he, then Tok, and finally the humbug joined in. And suddenly, the spell was broken. "There is no circus," cried Milo, realizing he'd been tricked. "There were no smells," barked Tok, his alarm now ringing furiously. "The applause is gone," complained the disappointed humbug. I warned you I was the census taker," sneered the census taker. "I help people find what they're not looking for, hear what they're not listening for, run after what they're not chasing, and smell what isn't even there. And furthermore," he cackled, hopping around gleefully on his stubby legs, "I'll steal your sense of purpose, take your sense of duty, destroy your sense of proportion. But for one thing, you'd be helpless yet." "What's that?" asked Milo fearfully. "As long as you have the sound of laughter," he groaned unhappily, "I cannot take your sense of humor. And with it, you've nothing to fear from me." "But what about them?" cried the terrified bug, for at that very instant the other demons had reached the top at last and were leaping forward to seize them. They ran from the stairs, bowling over the disconsolate census taker, ledger, ink bottle, eye shade, and all as they went. The humbug dashed up first, then Tok, and lastly Milo, almost too late, as a scaly arm brushed his shoe. The dangerous stairs danced dizzily in the wind, and the clumsy demons refused to follow, but they howled with rage and fury and watched with many pairs of burning eyes as the three small shapes vanished slowly into the clouds. And that's where we're going to stop. See you later.